Good evening, everyone. Chip Cooper for FTC Guardian and my partner, Alan Cutts. Here we are, the first Hangout in the month of July. We're halfway through the year, actually moving into the second half. It's just after the 4th of July holiday, sort of strange with the July 4th holiday coming at midweek, Wednesday. So it seems like some of us miss the extra day that we typically get when the holiday is on a Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, or Friday. But anyway, things are going full speed where I live. There's a lot of very nice waves coming in, particularly right now. We've got a hurricane going up the East Coast about 400 miles offshore, and there's a lot of nice swell coming in, good beach weather. So that's what I've been up to. I had a great 4th of July holiday, and I'll turn it over to Alan, and he'll tell you about everything he cooked.
Yeah, I cooked up a bunch of ribs this weekend, man. Chip's the smoker for the ribs, but I had to try a new protocol this week, so I did that. So that was a lot of fun. I don't really have a lot. I just the weather's finally changed. We're having summer up here in the Northeast in the Allentown area, so it's great. Everything. I mean, the weather has actually been beautiful the last week or more. So before we get started, because this always comes up, and I want to make sure I get it out there this time. I forget about it sometimes. If you have a question, in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner down there, there's a little thing down there that says, if you look beside it, says chat, or if you click the little bubbles, it says like questions, or something like that, send a question. Make sure you put your questions in the question box, because we have so many people online, it gets hard when they all end up in the chat box. For some reason, I mean, I have to know what Chip's talking about. I don't think tonight we're going to have a lot of questions, because it's going to be a lot of wait and see, I believe. But if you have a question, that's where you put it in the question box, and make sure you mark it as a question. Chip, let's go.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's going to be some wait and see, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But let's go to the slides. Tell me if you can see that one.
Yes, I can.
See it. So here we have a U.S. Supreme Court case that's about 10 days old. And this particular case that we're going to be talking about in this Hangout redefined a very technical term called nexus for purposes of collection of sales tax. The bottom line is we're all going to have to start collecting sales tax sometime fairly soon. That's the bottom line, but let's get into it in a little bit more detail. And of course, we've all seen the housekeeping announcement. The presentation, of course, is for informational purposes only. It's not legal advice, and we're not affiliated with the Federal Trade Commission. So here's the big headline. This was taken from Forbes.com on June 29th, just a few days ago. The U.S. Supreme Court reverses longstanding law on collection of sales taxes, meaning that at some point in the near future, we're probably going to have to start thinking about collecting sales tax, which we haven't been doing in the past. So here it is in terms of the specific cases. The new case, you see the date 2018, South Dakota versus Wayfair, overturned by by a 5-4 decision, I believe it was. A 1992 case, Quill Corporation versus North Dakota. I think it's just a coincidence that the other parties involved were South Dakota and North Dakota, which of course are states that collect sales taxes. So those two cases go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the most recent one, which we'll call Wayfair, essentially overruled the prior case, 1992 Quill. So let's look at the Quill case. Back in 1992, the issue was whether or what is a state's authority to require an out-of-state retailer to collect sales tax. And the ruling was that states could require an out-of-state retailer to collect sales tax only if the retailer had nexus. And nexus at that time, under the Quill decision, again, a U.S. Supreme Court case, was that the out-of-state retailer had to have a physical presence in the state, either a warehouse, an office, or maybe actual employees who live there, or have a sales force located there. So here's the idea. You live, let's say, in Florida, which I do, but you're buying through a catalog back in 1992. There wasn't much going on in terms of the internet back in 92. It was obviously in existence, but in terms of a commercial reality, it really hadn't blossomed yet. So let's say that in Florida, I have a catalog from a company based in New York, and I buy something there from the catalog. Do they have to, the New York company, which is an out-of-state company here in terms of what this analysis is showing us, do they have to collect income tax? And the New York company would not have to collect income tax from me located in Florida if I buy on, by phoning an order in or mailing it in, unless they have a physical presence or a sales force here. And this is the way things have been since 1992. So what is a sales tax? I think we're all pretty familiar with it. We pay a lot of sales taxes. I know I do. The general rule is that a state may tax goods, tangible personal property, not services, sold within its borders to the extent permitted by the Constitution. And the example is very similar to the one I just indicated. A consumer in Georgia buys a widget from a local retailer and pays sales tax collected by the retailer. So basically, a consumer in Georgia goes to a local Georgia retailer, buys a personal property item, say some type of consumer electronics, and he gets rung up with a sales tax. The problem would be if that consumer in Georgia goes to New York and buys the same consumer electronics device, then, what's the situation? But this is the definition of sales tax. Now, there's also sort of an other side of the sales tax coin known as use tax, which is a complement to the sales tax. And this would be to basically even up the score if I would go to New York back in 92 and buy the consumer electronics device from a catalog seller. So the example is if the same consumer in Georgia purchases a widget from an online retailer in New York, the consumer, me, I would be liable personally to pay a use tax at the same rate as if the widget was purchased in Georgia. The problem is, as you can see here at the bottom of this slide, the tax is imposed on the consumer. And the consumer, based on the honor system, is supposed to keep track of it, report it, and pay it, and nobody does. In fact, if you have ever paid a use tax, if anybody on this call has ever paid a use tax or even knows what it is, indicate in the chat box. I'll bet you there's no one here. So the problem then is if you are a business located in Georgia and people living in Georgia buy from an out-of-state retailer, say in New York, Georgia is cheated out of the sales tax because nobody pays, based on the honor system, the use tax, which is supposed to even up the ledger, so to speak. So now we fast forward from 1992 to the internet becoming a commercial reality. And we have two big losers in terms of taxation. First of all, we have states who are losing a massive amount of sales tax. Now, the Government Accounting Office, you see there under the heading, under the asterisk states, the GAO, which is the Government Accounting Office, estimated that states as a whole last year in 2017 lost in total over $17 billion in sales taxes because sales taxes were not collected at the point of sale and the consumers didn't pay the use tax they were supposed to pay, right? Now, if you ask the state governments, they'll tell you that the loss was probably twice 17 billion. So whatever the number is, it's big, right? There's a lot of money being lost to states who would love to collect more taxes in terms of sales tax. So as you can see in the second sub-bullet there, since 1992, but particularly since the mid-90s, 96 and forward, when the internet has become a commercial reality and a lot of sales are made online, these states who are losing all of this tax revenue are looking for ways to force these out-of-state retailers to collect the sales tax at the point of sale. So one big loser under the 92 ruling of Quill would be the states who are losing a lot of taxes. The other one would be big box retailers losing sales primarily to Amazon, right? Because until very recently, Amazon hasn't charged a single cent of sales tax to people all over the country who are buying widgets from Amazon. So you have a lot of pushback from Walmart, for example, and also Best Buy and other big box retailers who, are losing sales because people can buy the same consumer electronics device from Amazon, or at least have been doing in the past, without having to pay the sales tax. So if it's a fairly expensive item, consumers save money. So big box retailers are also big losers under the 92 Quill decision. And as a result, both the state taxing authorities and big box retailers have needed for a long time, particularly since the mid-90s, for nexus to be redefined. And that is exactly what happened in this case, this Wayfair case. And here it is, in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court held that merely having certain minimum threshold levels of economic activity in a state may be sufficient to establish nexus for taxing purposes. Now, that's a very general statement. Let's take a look at the specifics here. And we're looking specifically at the South Dakota sales and use tax law, because that was the case that went up on appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And South Dakota had imposed a sales and use tax requirement on businesses that deliver, and these are the economic impacts, deliver more than $100,000 worth of goods or services into the state, and this would be on a fiscal year basis, as you see at the bottom of the slide, or engage in at least 200 transactions for the delivery of goods or services into the state, right? So now we have a situation where nexus is not just, do you have a plant or do you have employees located in the state? It's really, do you have more than $100,000 worth of sales or at least 200 transactions within a state? And now we have, on appeal, this decision carried 5-4, approving this economic effect basis for expanding what the nexus requirement was. So here it is in summary. The former nexus requirement was based on a physical presence or office or actual sales force personnel in a state. Now, under Quill, that's been expanded, not replaced. The former nexus still remains, but it's now been expanded to include these economic impact factors that we just talked about. So here it is again, specifically, what is economic nexus? Now the South Dakota case basically is good for the entire United States. Either more than $100,000 worth of sales, goods and services, or at least 200 transactions, right? So here we have, a new day for taxing authorities, state taxing authorities, and also big box retailers who've been losing a lot of sales to Amazon. However, the U.S. Supreme Court provided no additional guidance about what in the world states could do or should do. Really, it's a case-by-case situation. So there's a lot of confusion right now. We know what the decision was, but how it will be enacted or implemented state by state is really up in the air right now. We have far more questions about how this new decision, this Wayfair decision, how it will actually be implemented, and of course, how it will affect you as an online seller of goods or services. So if you look at these bullet points quickly, we'll see some of the issues that need to be at least resolved at some point. Right now, 20 states have an economic nexus statute, but they're not the same as the South Dakota one. So what will they do? They know exactly what the threshold is and what it has been approved by the Supreme Court in the Wayfair case. So are these states going to push the envelope and try to go to a lower threshold than what the Supreme Court approved in the Wayfair case? We don't know. What will the other states do who do not have economic nexus statutes now? Well, of course, they're going to pass something. But are they going to pass exactly what South Dakota had, or are they going to try something different? And what about back taxes? Some authorities think that this decision actually opens the door to some taxing authorities going back and collecting back taxes, which I think is terrible. And based on research I've done recently, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen, but at least it's been discussed in some circles. And then, of course, we have nexus involving how you handle transactions, inventory if you sell physical items. Do you have employees in different states? And do you have affiliates who are located in different states, which may trigger the nexus issue and cause you to have to collect sales tax? And then finally, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is sort of the general rules in terms of the questions that we have ahead of us. What will the U.S. Congress do? Will they step in to coordinate and pass some law that applies equally across the 50 states? We don't know that at this time. So the bottom line is there are far more questions than answers. At least we know that the door is open for an expanded definition of nexus, and we know specifically what was approved in terms of South Dakota. But as far as the rest of it, how it's going to impact us as online marketers, we're not sure. So what are your next steps? Well, one thing might be to review where you keep inventory if you do sell tangible goods, where your employees are located, and affiliates. That's a tricky one. And look at your sales volume and transactions by state. And if you think about this more than just a couple of minutes, you'll realize that, you know, these thresholds of sales, 200 a year, you know, in Nevada, you might, unless you're a big seller, you're not going to be actually selling more than 200 sales in Nevada in a year, but you're going to probably be over that significantly in California because of the difference in population. So really very tricky here to sort of get a handle on this. And the bottom line here is, again, more questions than answers. It's important for you to know what happened in the Supreme Court in the last 10 days. And that's the purpose of this Hangout. However, specifically about how it actually impacts you, we don't know at this time. And that's the reason why you should stay tuned to FTC Guardian, because, you know, when we find out how things are shaking out, you'll be the first to know it. And of course, it's all going to be handled in terms of our Hangouts. So here are the big takeaways. The nexus has been expanded to include economic nexus, which in South Dakota, which has been approved, either $100,000 or more in sales or at least 200 transactions on a fiscal year basis. Many questions remain. And for the short term, which is basically now, there's a lot of uncertainty. And of course, we just mentioned you might now be thinking about reviewing prior nexus and the new economic nexus terms that are discussed in this Hangout. Bottom line, stay tuned to FTC Guardian. As things develop, we will let you know. Not many tags here to be entered for this particular presentation. Quill, sales tax, nexus, and of course, Wayfair. I forgot that one. That's going to be in there as well. So, Alan, that's the end of my presentation. Let's go back to the screen here and away from the slides. Do we have any questions, or everybody sort of sitting there thinking, wow, what's going to happen to me? Yeah, I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, Eddie, click the volume. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to answer Phil's question first. Phil is, how do we possibly know how much tax to charge for all the numerous states? Phil, this is actually, depending on what shopping cart you use, this has already been addressed by a lot of shopping carts. I don't know. I want to go back a number of years ago. This was addressed because New York has a lot of different taxes. Like you're talking about Florida. New York has a lot of different taxes in different counties, communities, cities, or whatever. And some of the shopping carts already address the sales tax. When you say I can collect, the problem with it, you can collect the sales taxes. I know I have another company called American Mad Supply, and we use another shopping cart called Ultra. I think it's called Ultra. And we have offices, so we could put in there where they're purchasing from within Florida. For example, we have an office in Florida. So if they purchase in Florida, if they purchase in Sarasota County or wherever that is, they get charged one tax. If they purchase in a different county, they get charged a different tax. It's collecting it is never the problem. It doesn't appear from the shopping cart standpoint. It's paying it, because can you only imagine that this goes throughout the U.S. and now you're having to send out 150 different sales tax receipts, collection checks to all these different states and communities and counties and everything else for collection of all these different taxes. The shopping carts themselves, in a lot of cases, are keeping up with it and will charge the amount. It's just paying it that's the pain in the ass. I mean, that's what's getting, being able to actually, send the checks and keep up with the quarterly accounting to pay it all. That's where the pain is going to be. And so that's going to be the big one. Let me see. I'm going to scroll through some questions. You have people marking those questions, so that's good. How will Quill affect the online subscription service? I will be setting up an online information only source. Stephen, the whole Quill thing right now, I don't think very many of our users with 4,500 plus, I don't think very many of our subscribers should be concerned about the $100,000 a month. It's $100,000. It's not even a month. It's $100,000, right?
A year.
$100,000 a year, or 200 purchases, because that means you have to have 200 purchases from a particular state, or $100,000 in a year from one particular state, outside of your own, right? Outside of your own state. So I wouldn't be too concerned. What I would start to think about are my affiliates, because if you've got if they grasp onto that these affiliates represent you in all these different states, and they say via Nexus, then right now, don't be too concerned. But if all the states start to say, well, if you've got an affiliate, which I'll give you an example. My brother years ago used to work for Dell, and Dell originally, I lived in Allentown. Dell did not collect taxes originally in Pennsylvania. And then one time I ordered from Dell, and they collected taxes. And I knew why. Is because they put in the airport in Philadelphia as well as in Allentown those little kiosks where you can see all the Dell products. And by doing that through Nexus meant that they had a footprint in the state.
Right.
So I had to pay taxes because they had a kiosk that I couldn't even buy anything, but the Dell had a kiosk.
You had to pay taxes on your new laptop.
I had to pay taxes on my new laptop because they had a kiosk in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, all these kiosks. So when they start to look at that and start to say the affiliates, That's going to be the killer. I don't think most of us are going to be too concerned about the $100,000 or the 200 sales. But if they hone in on that affiliate side, and we're doing affiliate stuff, that's going to be the kicker for most of us in the internet marketing space.
The floodgates are going to open where a lot of these states are now seeing a pathway to collect sales tax from sales to out-of-state purchasers, right? And so, at some time in the next, year and a half, a lot of this is going to bubble to the surface, and we'll have something to report. Hopefully something will happen to help small business deal with this. Maybe some uniform federal statute or raising the thresholds. I mean, right now, it may be if you're a fairly small business, you've got to worry about Texas, California, New York, states with big populations, and when you make a few sales in there. But a lot of the states, you're just not going to even come close to the threshold. So, this is sort of a discussion of what might happen and what has happened. Just stay tuned and we'll keep you updated. That's what we're here for.
This is a really good question because it's about a SaaS. With our SaaS subscription business, we bill monthly 12 times per year. So if we have over 17 customers in one state, we'd trip the 200 transactions. Would we expect the impact from a SaaS subscription?
I don't know. I mean, that is a very good question.
Yeah,
but
I'm glad he asked it because now I have the same question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'm not being facetious here. It is a very good question. I do not know the answer. And quite frankly, I'm not sure right now that anybody knows the answer right now. But somewhere down the road, not too far into the future, we'll start understanding what the rules are, how all this is going to be interpreted. Right now, we're within 10 days of this decision. It just got handed down. And of course, at FTC Guardian, we take very seriously passing on new developments. And the Hangout series that we have, of course, is the way that we do it. So our mission here is to say, now you understand what started everything to develop over the next year or so, and we're going to keep you apprised.
Right now, where we're at right now is we're keeping you up to date with what's coming down the road. I don't think anybody needs to do anything today. It's just you need to be informed about it and understand that this is coming and start to think about it, right? You need to start to think about this. Right. My affiliates, this recurring transaction, because I hadn't thought about that. We have a lot of recurring transactions. So that's something we got to think. We need to think about is recurring transactions. So we'll keep you up to date. But since this just happened, we wanted to pass it on to everybody today, right?
Let me echo what Alan said. Don't worry about it right now. We're not trying to freak you guys out. Our mission is to pass on new developments as soon after they occur as possible. And this one's very recent. But here we're telling you very clearly, don't worry right now. Be aware of it, and we'll keep you up to date as things become more apparent down the road. That's another reason, of course, to attend these Hangouts.
Yeah, and Maria, you had a question about how does this affect the sale of digital products? Digital products are digital products. It's information and services. Digital products, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing.
Let me say, in some states, there have been definitions to cover SaaS services.
So it's separate.
Technically,
but a digital product like an ebook. Is an ebook a SaaS service or is that a
ebook? Well, let me just say this. Yes, in some states have taken steps already prior to this decision to tax digital products, downloadable things, online services like our training, that sort of thing, where you log in and watch videos. Traditionally, sales tax has been levied on the sale of personal property, a widget, your laptop computer, not downloadable information. But some states have tried to push that collection responsibility into digital products. And I'm sure that that's going to happen here. So again, stay tuned. We'll keep you up, and we'll not only keep you up with what's happening, but we're going to make recommendations the way Alan mentioned a few minutes ago about what we understand that shopping carts are doing to provide assistance. Obviously, small businesses are not going to just be left twisting in the wind here. Somebody's going to come to your rescue. I mean, you're going to have to pay for the service, right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to be like you've got to do it yourself. Or, with GDPR, you could spend a lot of time and money hiring programmers to do all sorts of GDPR compliant opt-in forms, and then all the back end record keeping. You could do that, but if you hang on for a little while, there are going to be services that you can sign up for that'll do it for you. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. So part of our responsibility, A, is to let you know what has actually happened, essentially when it happens, but also keep up with what the new requirements are developing, and then make recommendations about services that help you solve the problem without having to figure it out yourself. So, that's what we're going to be focused on.
Yeah. And somebody had another question about digital products and services. Today, you don't need to do anything, whether it's web design, digital products, downloadable products. Don't get overly concerned about it today. Just put it in the back of your head that this needs to be, and when you're putting together that little that list of things you need to think about down the line, and when we send you another email or Molly posts something else for another hangout, when it's coming, then you're going to need to know about it. So that pretty much answers all the questions. But I would say with that, I'm going to lead to, we started doing GDPR hangouts back, I want to say in
January.
Was it January, February? So, and we have another one coming up later this month. And most of our members, we've had questions about this, and I just did a video for Molly that I think she published, maybe Michelle published it last week or earlier this week on GDPR. Telling our members, don't get overly concerned today about GDPR if you're not specifically targeting UK subjects. If you're targeting UK subjects, you need to go all in. And
EU subjects.
Excuse me, EU subject. If you're targeting EU subjects, you need to go all in and you need to do it. But if you're not targeting them, don't be concerned. Now, some of this is going to change. What Chip has come to me with is like, did you know that California just passed what they call GDPR light? So what I'm telling everybody is, look, we have roughly a year and a half to become totally GDPR compliant, whether it's in the US or for UK subjects, EU subjects, which is fine. We've got a year and a half to actually take care of all of it. So we can do that, right? And we've got a year and a half. We can do it. We can make sure all that happens. And you've got plenty of time to just kind of get everything rolling and make it happen. So unless you are specifically marketing to EU subjects, don't get overly concerned. Stay tuned though, because California has passed the GDPR light, which as Chip has mentioned before, when it comes to this whole FTC compliance and everything else, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. California always does stuff, and the FTC kind of follows what California does. So if California is going to do it, you can only imagine that in the next year and a half, the FTC will somewhat follow that same protocol. So you'll be informed, and you'll be kept up to date, and don't worry, you'll get everything you need to be compliant with everybody.
You fill in a couple of the gaps and summarize. And I was talking with Alan about this today, and I think yesterday as well. And that is, this year, 2018, is a year that is probably the most disruptive in terms of what you're going to be doing in the future as an online marketer of any year that I'm aware of. I know that if you've watched any of our webinars, we talk about 2009 being a pivotal year, and it was. But this year, 2018, is probably more significant and more disruptive than 2009. Why? Three things so far, and we've only just finished half of the year. So first was GDPR, effective May 25. We've talked about that. The new development that Alan just mentioned is within the last 10 days, just about the time this Supreme Court decision came down, the state legislature in California passed their version of a data protection statute protecting their residents, right? And the effective date is 1/1/2020, January 1, 2020. That's why Alan mentioned you've got a year and a half. That's where he came up with a year and a half. So we don't really know, and we're going to have a future hangout dedicated to this California statute, which some people refer to as GDPR light, because my initial very brief reading of it looks like an awful lot like GDPR, right? So we're going to cover that, but we have a year and a half to January 1, 2020 to actually be compliant. So we have a little window there, thank goodness, where we can, help you comply. And then now we've had number 3, this Wayfair decision, which overruled Quill on Nexus and opens the floodgates to responsibilities of online companies to collect sales tax, right? 3 big major developments in the first half of this year that are very disruptive potentially. But right now, as Alan said, he's right, don't panic. Just be aware that they exist and aware that we're working for you to guide you through this. And generally speaking, we have this year and a half window, unless, as Alan said, you're targeting EU residents by having a sales page in the French or German language or some other EU language, or you are accepting payment in euros, right, which would be evidence of targeting them, or maybe you have testimonial lists from France or Germany or some other company. That would also be evidence that you're targeting EU data subjects. If you're not doing those things, then you're okay right now for GDPR, and you can be thinking about this year and a half. So be aware, don't panic. We're here to help you, and we've got a little bit of time here to sort all of this stuff out and get you where you need to be. All right.
We're good.
We're good. I'm good. You're good. Everybody's good. So we'll say good night. Thanks very much for attending, and stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date. Good night, everybody.
Good night.